The demonstration in Southport is believed to have been organised by members of the far-right English Defence League, while chants about the group's leader, Tommy Robinson, were heard at the protest in London. And the former Scottish First Minister, Humza Yousaf, has called for the EDL to be proscribed as a terrorist organisation, something the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, is said to be considering. So just who is the EDL? Joe Mulhall is the Director of Research for the campaign group Hope Not Hate and author of Drums in the Distance, Journeys into the Global Far Right. Joe, a very good afternoon from us.
Afternoon.
What do you know about the current state of the EDL?
Well, it's been somewhat surprising to hear all this talk about the English Defence League, as an organisation, it hasn't existed for some years. It was founded in 2009 by Stephen Lennon, or as Tommy Robinson is the name he goes by. He left the organisation in 2013, and it dribbled on for several years subsequently, but in any meaningful sense, it hasn't existed for many, many years. So I'm presuming that the discussions around the English Defence League are very much shorthand. We know for a fact that individuals linked to Tommy Robinson were involved in some of the disturbances in Southport. We know that we heard Tommy Robinson chanting both in Southport and also last night in Hartlepool. But to talk about banning the English Defence League is a misunderstanding of both what's been happening in the last few days, but also how the far right organises these days. It's much less about traditional organisations with membership lists and branch structures. It's a decentralised network of thousands of individuals, often operating online and sometimes spilling offline.
Did anything more formal fall into the void left by the EDL?
There's a range of far-right organisations that are traditional in that sense that still exist to this day. There's explicitly fascist organisations like Patriotic Alternative. There's anti-Muslim groups like Britain First. So there is all of these kind of traditional groups, but they're very, very small. You know, Tommy Robinson as a figure, for example, is much larger as an influencer nowadays than he was even at the height of the English Defence League. His demonstration in London in Trafalgar Square last weekend attracted over 20,000, maybe even 30,000 people. What we now see is a range of individuals, what you might call kind of far-right social media influencers, that create content online and spread their message online, or sometimes organise demonstrations. But it's not like there was a formal organisation which has, replaced the English Defence League.
So tell us a bit more about that rally, because, I mean, it was interesting on many levels, frightening on so many levels too. There was an element of the people who attended that rally choosing reform as their political representation. There were people there, weren't there, who were wearing the teal rosettes of reform. Is there any kind of a link that you would be able to point to establishing a connection between former EDL supporters and reform?
Well, on the demonstration in London, the largest cheer of the entire day was when Tommy Robinson asked who the people voted for. And when he asked if people voted for reform, it was probably the largest shout of the entire day. There's not necessarily direct links, as in Nigel Farage has often been careful to distance himself from Tommy Robinson. That said, much of Nigel Farage's rhetoric throughout the election campaign and subsequently, and certainly his video message about Southport, is indistinguishable from the rhetoric that Tommy Robinson uses. Many of Tommy Robinson's supporters and much of the wider far right in the run-up to the general election called on their supporters to vote for Nigel Farage and to vote for reform. But there's not necessarily a formalised link of any form. But there's certainly many members around Tommy Robinson and in the wider far right that are working to kind of push supporters towards reform.
What do you think the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, should do?
So I think talking of banning the English Defence League doesn't make sense. As I say, it doesn't necessarily exist, and it isn't particularly useful. What we need to understand is how the modern far right operates, and it is in these decentralised networks. If we're going to take steps, they have to be effective. And banning a defunct organisation isn't an effective step. But there's a range of things we can do. Much of the misinformation and disinformation that we saw spreading around the horrifying attack in Southport was being spread by social media influencers online, on social media platforms. We do now have the online safety bill. So there's certain powers within that can be used. We also can look at things like people create, subjudice, etc. There's those sorts of things. But the most important step here is that what we're seeing spilling out onto the streets, and we're going to see more demonstrations this evening, we're going to see more demonstrations over the weekend is a lack of social cohesion. And I think what the government really needs to be looking at is what steps are they taking to implement a genuine, wide-ranging kind of social integration strategy, because that was something that has been ignored for many, many years by the previous government, and it's something we need to be looking at now with the current government.
And the problem is, Joe, as you well know, if you feel that you're on the side of right, that you're doing something to show your anger at the brutal deaths of children, what on earth is it that persuades you to turn away and do something different?
Well, one of the narratives that the people involved in some of these disturbances are saying is that they continue to say that it is, of course, about this horrific attack in Southport. But the target in Southport riot on the Tuesday night, sorry, was a mosque. When, of course, we know that the individual in question wasn't a Muslim, wasn't from the Muslim community, it wasn't an Islamist attack. And even if he was, that wouldn't, of course, justify a chance of burn the mosque in Southport or racist attacks last night in Hartlepool. Many of the individuals engaging in this behaviour are either from the far right or they hold far right beliefs, racist beliefs, discriminatory and prejudiced beliefs. We shouldn't be allowing them to get away with saying that this is legitimate anger. Everyone is angry about what happened on Monday in Southport. It was horrifying and disgusting. But these people are deciding to take that anger and they're going to throw bricks at the mosque.
Yeah.
And I think it's the radicalisation is the key.
Sure. And even when the mother of one of the children who died asked people to stop, they didn't. So I wonder what your thoughts are on the person who might have the voice to really cut across, because it's probably not a politician, is it?
There has been some, one of the things we can really take hope in is that we've seen people cleaning up the streets in Southport, rebuilding the wall outside the mosques. The people that are really most effective when it comes to trying to deal with these sorts of events are people that the local community trust. Yes, we need strong statements from our politicians. Yes, we need responsible reporting from our media. But realistically, the people that are on the ground in communities that are upset and angry and divided are much more likely to listen to a message that they trust who is local. And it's about finding those individuals and amplifying their voice. That could be the local boxing coach, the local football coach. It could be a local religious leader. There's a range of people. We need responsibility from the top, but we also need to go back into these communities and look at why are people angry, what's happening on the streets there, and find the messengers that are going to be able to calm this down within the communities where it's happening.
Do you think that this weekend is going to be even more full of trouble?
Well, I'm really, really concerned. I mean, there's a number of very, very provocative and unacceptable demonstrations being planned for this evening, including one outside a mosque in Liverpool. We're seeing, I hope or hate, we've picked up at least 12 demonstrations planned for this evening and tomorrow all over the country, and that list is growing. Nottingham, Bristol, Cardiff, Manchester. Many of these demonstrations that are being planned have clear and very, very clear far-right links. Others have less clear links. It's unsure who's calling some of these events. But we've seen the levels of disturbances both last night in Hartlepool, with last night in London, of course, where we saw large numbers of arrests in Whitehall, and we saw the horrifying scenes in Southport. There are clearly groups of people that are attempting to weaponise this horrifying event that happened on Monday and direct people towards violence and disturbances. And I think we're in for a possibly rough ride, especially this evening, but also tomorrow. And there's going to be a lot of work to be done to make sure this doesn't spill out.
Joe, good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Joe Mulhall is the Director of Research for the campaign group Hope Not Hate.